In every history book, across every faded scroll, there are stories etched in courage stories of people who stood up when they were told to sit down, who spoke out when they were ordered to be silent. These are the stories of the fight for freedom, a fight that looks different in every era, yet beats with the same heart. Imagine a city cloaked in an unnatural silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping town, but the heavy, oppressive silence of fear. In this city, colors were forbidden. Buildings were gray, clothes were gray, even the sky seemed to have surrendered its blue. The rulers, known only as the monitors, believed that color stirred emotions, and emotions led to chaos. So they drained the world of its vibrancy, hoping to create a perfectly orderly, perfectly dull society. In a small gray apartment lived a young woman named Elara. She was a painter, though no one would know it. Her canvases were hidden beneath loose floorboards, and her paints, confiscated long ago, were now just a memory. She painted with charcoal, sketching shades of gray, dreaming in hues she could barely recall. Her grandmother, a woman who remembered the world before the gray, would tell her stories. Stories of crimson sunsets, of emerald forests, and of oceans so deeply blue they held the secrets of the sky. One night, Elara's grandmother gave her a small, tightly wrapped package. "This was your grandfather's," she whispered, her voice frail. "He believed one spark could reignite the sun." Inside, nestled in old cloth, was a single tube of paint. The label was worn, but Elara could just make out the word canary, yellow. A color so bright, so defiant, it felt like holding a fragment of a star. For days, Elara just looked at it. The risk was immense. To be caught with color meant being recalibrated, a chillingly sterile term for having your memories and personality wiped clean. But the memory of her grandmother's stories, the ache for a world she'd never seen, was stronger than her fear. Late one night, under the sliver of a gray moon, she crept out. With trembling hands, she uncapped the tube. The paint smelled of linseed oil and something else, hope. She found a large, prominent wall on the central plaza, a wall that was monitored around the clock. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent city. She began to paint. It wasn't a grand mural or a complex scene. It was a single, simple shape, a bird, a canary. As she filled it in with the brilliant, shocking yellow, it felt as if the color was singing. The yellow was so loud in the quiet grayness, so alive against the dead concrete. It was an act of pure defiance. She finished just as the first hints of dawn threatened the sky and scrambled back to the safety of her apartment, her heart still racing. She expected sirens, the slam of boots on pavement, the inevitable knock on her door, but nothing happened. When the city awoke, a ripple of shock spread through the morning commuters. People stopped. They stared. They had been trained to ignore anything out of the ordinary, to keep their heads down. But the yellow bird was impossible to ignore. It was a tiny sun burning on the wall. Whispers started, quiet at first, like the rustling of leaves. An old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, touched the wall gently, as if to confirm it was real. A child pointed, a wordless question in their eyes. The monitors were furious. They dispatched a cleaning crew immediately, and by midday, the wall was gray again. They issued a stern announcement, warning against any acts of chromatic vandalism. They thought they had extinguished the spark, but they were wrong. They had only fanned it. The image of the yellow bird was seared into the city's collective memory. The next night, in a different part of the city, a splash of red appeared on a bridge, a single perfect apple. The night after, a streak of blue, like a flowing river, decorated the steps of the administration building. These weren't coordinated. They were spontaneous acts of courage inspired by a single yellow bird. People were finding old, hidden pigments, making their own from crushed berries and flowers, anything to reclaim the colors they were denied. Elara continued to paint, but she was no longer alone. She had become part of a silent, colorful rebellion. They called themselves the Chromatics. They worked in the dead of night, leaving vibrant marks on the city's gray canvas. Their art was their voice, their protest, their declaration that a life without emotion, without beauty, was not a life at all. The fight wasn't easy. The monitors increased patrols. Drones buzzed through the streets, their searchlights scanning for any hint of color. People were caught. They were recalibrated, their faces returning to the public as blank slates, a terrifying warning to others. The risk was greater than ever, and fear began to creep back in. The colorful marks became fewer, more fleeting. Alara felt a wave of despair. Had it all been for nothing? As she hid in her room, her grandmother came to her. She didn't offer words of comfort. Instead, she handed Alara a small, cracked mirror. "Look," she said. "What do you see?" Alara saw her own face, pale with fear, but then she looked closer. She saw the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. She saw the faint pink on her lips. She saw the subtle flush of her own skin. Color was in them. It had always been. The monitors could paint the walls gray, but they couldn't paint over their very being. That was the turning point. The rebellion changed. It became more personal, more intimate. A woman would wear a hidden blue ribbon in her hair. A man would tuck a red flower into his lapel just before leaving for work, removing it before he stepped outside. They started a secret market where they traded colored threads, small painted stones, and books with colorful illustrations hidden within gray covers. They were building a world of color in the shadows of the gray one. Freedom wasn't just about painting walls. It was about keeping the color alive inside themselves and sharing it with each other. The final act of the rebellion wasn't a battle with weapons, but an explosion of art. On the anniversary of the first Gray Edict, the Chromatics planned their masterpiece. For weeks, they had been secretly preparing. They had fashioned thousands of small paper birds, each one painted a different, brilliant color. That morning, as the city began its dreary routine, something extraordinary happened. From rooftops and windows, the paper birds were released. A storm of color rained down on the gray streets. Red, blue, green, yellow, purple, a kaleidoscope of hope fluttered through the air. They landed on the shoulders of the monitors, settled on the sterile buildings, and filled the plaza. The people stopped, but this time they didn't just stare. A child laughed and chased a swirling orange bird. An old woman caught a blue one and held it to her cheek, tears streaming down her face. The silence was broken, not by sirens, but by a rising murmur of wonder and joy. The monitors stood frozen. They had machines to scrub paint and laws to punish dissent, but they had no protocol for a blizzard of beauty. They had no way to fight joy. In that moment, their power, built on the suppression of human spirit, seemed fragile, almost pathetic. They couldn't recalibrate an entire city that was now remembering how to feel. The fight for freedom wasn't over in a day. It took time for the old laws to crumble, for the gray paint to be stripped away, revealing the original brick and stone beneath. But that day the colored birds flew was the day freedom truly began. It began not with a declaration of war, but with a shared memory of beauty, with a collective act of courage that said, "We will not be gray. We choose to live in color." Alara, no longer hiding, stood in the plaza, watching her city come alive. She was just one person. She had only a single tube of yellow paint, but she had learned that the fight for freedom often begins that way, with one small brave act that reminds us of what it means to be human. It's a reminder that even in the bleakest of grays, a splash of color, a flicker of hope, can be enough to change the world. These stories remind us that freedom isn't just a grand concept for on battlefields. It's in the courage to speak your truth, the will to create beauty in a dull world, and the simple, powerful act of choosing not to be afraid. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more tales of the human spirit.